Good morning, everyone. I think we're asking people if you don't mind to keep their microphones off. And we are recording this webinar, so if you're comfortable being recorded, please feel free to leave your video on, but if not, you might want to turn it off. Okay, so I think we'll start and people can join as they arrive. So good morning, my name's Sarah Erskine. I'm Head of Public Health for Mental Health and Communities of Interest, and I'll be delivering this webinar today with my esteemed colleague Delvina, who will introduce herself now.
Hi, good morning everybody. My name is Delvina Saunders and I'm the Mental Health Ethnic Inequalities Lead for Adults hosted in Public Health, and we want to welcome you. Thank you for joining today to address this very important issue. Just a few housekeeping rules, as Sarah just mentioned before, if you didn't hear. Please make sure that you've turned your microphone off and that it's on mute, and this webinar will be recorded, so if you can turn your camera off if you're not comfortable with being recorded, and there should be some transcripts that come up as well should you require them. And please feel free to put any questions in the comments section and we'll aim to answer them towards the end of the session. So this is our agenda for the Want to Know More webinar for addressing mental health inequalities within ethnic minority groups. And we'll be kind of taking you through a journey of what Synergi Leeds is about and what we're doing to address that agenda surrounding mental health. So we're going to start off with playing you our Synergi Leeds video, and it's around about 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on now to some information about the data.
Thanks, Del. So hopefully that video just gave you a bit of an overview really of the journey so far and where we've been, what we've been doing really since 2017, 2018. And this work really, this issue of kind of increased risk of severe mental illness in some diverse communities and the amplification of that in services is obviously an issue that predates the Synergi work in Leeds. I just want to acknowledge that to start with. But the particular piece of work that we're involved with and all that work that you've just seen on that video came out of really the 2017 Mental Health Needs Assessment that Public Health produced. And at the same time as we were doing that, LYPFT, so the Acute Mental Health Trust in the city, were doing some analysis around with Touchstone around the overrepresentation of groups detained in mental health crisis. And I'll talk more about the needs assessment and that analysis later. But just to say, we've built on that methodology to really understand and to explain, you know, at a citywide level, what the issues are, because I think sometimes some of the barriers that Del and I have experienced through this work is people, you know, are kind of incredulous that this is still an issue. So this graph is quite stark you know, I was in two minds whether to present it at the start of this webinar, but I think it's important that we see the reality of the situation in Leeds at the current time. So this graph is taken from some analysis that we've done, and the way that the lines move is our aspiration in the city for what we want to happen. So what the graph is showing at the very left-hand side is that for some groups in the city, compared to white population groups, there is an increased risk of being detained in crisis. And that increased risk can be seen across all diverse groups in Leeds, but it's particularly stark for Black Caribbean, Black African, and people from any other Black background. And that's the red line at the top, where the risk of being detained in mental health crisis is slightly more than 2.5 times that of someone from a white background. So a lot of this was picked up in the video, but just to kind of bring it to life even more, as I said, the Mental Health Needs Assessment in 2017 showed that Mental Health Act admissions and detentions were higher in diverse groups. We also saw, as many of you on the call will already know, that there were disparities in GP QOF data and also in IAPT access and recovery data for people from diverse communities. We set up, as a result of the Mental Health Needs Assessment, a steering group to look at this issue and try and move further faster to address it. What happened in that very first meeting is people really expressed huge amounts of hurt and anger that we were still having to deal with this issue, and a sense of disbelief that anything would change. And it was really, really difficult for us to find a way forward. It was a very, very difficult meeting. Some of you on the call may have even been there. It was a very difficult meeting. And one of the clear messages that came out from that meeting was actually Leeds City Council, Public Health, the Mental Health Trust, you don't really know what's happening in communities. You've got this data, but you don't understand what it's like. So Gate, Gypsy and Traveller Exchange, and Ellie at Gate at the time offered to co-facilitate a workshop with us using a methodology that they developed called Roads, Bridges and Tunnels. And this was really the start of us, I think, trying to work in a different way on the issue. And we should have put the link in actually, but you can read the write-up from that workshop. It's on the Leeds Observatory. We'll try and include a link to it later on in the webinar. Some clear things came out of that session, and they were really about racism and discrimination still exists in services. This isn't just about increased risk, which itself is related to perhaps racism and discrimination, structural inequalities, but actually you've got to acknowledge people who commission services that you're not commissioning them in the right way. So it's a really powerful message. We had further meetings after that stakeholder event, and we really, again, still struggle to find a way through. And one of the reasons I think that we struggle to find a way through is There are so many places where things aren't as they should be across the system. They're not as they should be in primary care, in GP practices, despite many people in the city wanting them to be better. Things aren't as they should be in education settings, in the real world when people are walking around, and they're certainly not as they should be or as we would want them to be in other parts of the mental health system. And it was at this point that we developed a relationship with the National Synergi Collaborative Centre. And the Synergi Collaborative Centre is funded to work for free with cities, and they're funded by the Lankelly Chase organisation, specifically around ethnic inequalities in severe mental illness. So they came to run a session, which was some of the early pictures in the video that you just saw, with us in 2019. And this was a huge turning point in the city, I think, because it really signalled that we wanted to do things differently. We wanted to be collaborative. The event was really well attended by people from, all sectors of Leeds, service users and carers, and it really marked a bit of a turning point. And on the same day, as luck would have it, we also signed off the Leeds Mental Health Strategy, which is that picture there, and priority 2, you might not be able to see it on the screen, in the citywide mental health strategy is a commitment to reducing the overrepresentation of people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities admitted and also detained in crisis. So that's kind of where we are. I'll pick up the stuff around NIHR funding, etc. later on in the presentation. Yeah, so our approach, when we worked with Synergi, what was really formative and transformational about working with them is they gave us a new way to think about the problem or the wicked problem or the set of problems. And that formulation, in effect, of what the problems are really then informed our solution. And how we think about things in Synergi Leeds and with the national team is that perhaps we've not made inroads into this work in the past because we've done kind of 3 things. We've silenced voices and we move away from voices that are challenging and angry, perhaps because it's difficult to work with those feelings, with anger, with challenge. And also we don't do enough to centre the voices of service users and carers. We don't maybe have, or we didn't have perhaps a shared language and a literacy around some of these issues. We don't have, there's a lot of discussion at the moment, isn't there, nationally around, do we want to be using the term BAME? Do we want to be using diverse communities? And that just becomes more and more difficult when you layer on all the sort of stigma and discrimination that people can feel around serious mental illness. So there was a real disconnect in terms of language and even understanding about what the issue was. And there's a kind of fear and inertia from some parts of statutory services and fundamentally from some white people around addressing this issue for fear of getting it wrong. And that leads to a kind of inertia, which in itself I've come to understand is a kind of form of discrimination. So that kind of formulation of the problem then leads to the approach that we've taken. And I hope as we go through this morning, you'll really begin to understand what that approach is. So the approach that we're taking is really to, in everything we do, challenge the power structures that have contributed to the outcome that we're trying to change, which sounds a bit highfalutin, doesn't it? But in effect, what that means is, and it's little things, it means in every interaction, in every meeting, people who have historically held power and privilege have to recognise that, and we have to also change the structures so that we're sort of challenging discrimination in everything that we do. So just one example of that is, Dale will talk about it in a little while, but when we've been given some money for this work from the CCG to develop a grants programme, and it was a real shift, a really important shift for us, that we weren't seen as being the CCG and Leeds City Council, giving money away to groups, to community groups. It was really clear from our Synergi network that it wasn't to be done like that. It was some really strong voices that actually we wanted to co-create and co-design what this grants programme looked like. Similarly, when we recruited to Dell's Post, actually, there were some really clear, strong messages from within the steering group around the person that the city wanted for Dell's Post, and we got exactly the person that we wanted. But so we, worked really closely with the steering group to develop the job description. We thought really carefully about how we would do the interview for the post. So it's just little things like that, really. So from 2019 until now, so from the Creative Spaces event that we held in October in 2019, we now have 2 posts. Dell is leading on the adult work, and we have someone who's hosted within Forum Central who's leading on the children and people's work. We have recurrent money for a grants programme, which is around supporting small grassroots organisations to develop psychological capacity locally, to build trust, to address stigma. And there's a direct line from how we think about that grants programme to what we were told in Roads, Bridges and Tunnels and what was said at the Creative Spaces event, which was, we are not commissioned to support people with severe mental illness. We're a third sector organisation. We're not commissioned to do that, but we are holding huge amounts of risk. We need support. And also lots and lots of there were lots of individuals around the city who were working in different pockets, supporting people with mental health problems almost on their own. So this grants programme is around sort of supporting that that activity that exists already and to strengthen that. We've grown our network. We've got a citywide steering group which operates on a network model. So this is around, we do deliver some things like this webinar and the grants, and we facilitate the grants programme and the Creative Spaces event. But what we do in the network, hopefully, is we enable people to come to talk openly about difficult situations, for there to be conflict within that group and for it to be okay and for it to be held, and then for people to feel energised and enabled to go back out into their organisations and affect change wherever they are, whether they're in a GP practice. We've got people from Leeds City College, we've got lots of people from the third sector, Leeds Community Healthcare, etc., etc., etc. And then using our links really in with the National Synergy Centre, we've developed a logic model, which is around how and where we think we can act. So it's not just about working within services, it's working outside of services as well. We've got some more Creative Spaces events coming up in the next year or so. And it's really important with this work, which I should have said in the formulation of the problem bit, that often what we've tried to do with this kind of work, and this is kind of how Synergi and how we in Leeds formulate it, we've tried to address it in a sort of data-driven action plan kind of way. And what that does is it doesn't really help people in positions of power to engage emotionally with the experience of what it might be like to be detained in crisis. So a lot of what we're doing is using creative methodologies, poetry, photo voice exhibitions to try and engage and work with people in a different way. So they are, they feel empathy and they are motivated and energised to take action. We've been asked to do this sort of thing nationally at the PHE on PHE webinars, and the work has also been recognised as a really good example of how you might think about mental illness prevention. And then we'll talk in a second that Leeds has also signed up to the National Pledge, which is, there are a couple of cities, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, and a couple of places in London who are part of this national Synergi ecosystem. And this is just, this is our thing that we abide by, really. If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you always got. So that, if it's starting to feel a bit samey, or if I'm offering to write reports, people will often say, stop it, stop being like that, and let's try and do this in a different way. So this is the Synergi Leeds pledge, and the pledge is really a set of kind of 8 or 9 areas that we want to work in, and it just helps us, as well as our logic model, where might we want to develop action. The pledge is kind of like cross-cutting themes that we can use to have conversations with organisations outside of the council and the NHS. What are we doing as a city around data and intelligence? What are we doing around training and capacity, for example? And I should say, you know, Councillor Rebecca Charwood has moved on now, but she was an absolute, and Councillor Arif also is really, really supportive. But at the start, Councillor Charwood was an absolute champion for this work, and she was absolutely brilliant. And I think, you know, going back to some of the formulation of the problem, I think what I'm really proud of in the city, not only of how we're approaching the work, but is that we've managed to lever in change and positivity and real allies across the system, from councillors, chief execs, from local third sector organisations, from across a whole range. And that's just the quote there that Councillor Charwood gave us for the pledge, I think. And yeah, this is one from Sarah Munro, which we saw in the video. So these are the pledge priorities and then how we are translating them. So I think I'm going to hand over to Del now. If you've got any questions about the section that I've just done, please do put them in the chat and then we'll answer at the end. So I'll hand over to Del to talk about specifically the grants programme.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really insightful to kind of go back through the journey and have a deeper understanding of why we're doing this work. So I'm going to talk to you about the grants scheme that we had and launched in December. So one of our commitments as Synergi Leeds is to engage with our community leaders, and to empower and support some of our grassroots organisations, because we recognise that a lot of them are doing a lot of the groundwork with our BME communities, and they seem to have a level of trust with our communities that other services may not have had time to develop. So as a part of a broader programme of work to try and reduce mental health inequalities, together with the partners that are listed below and Leeds Community Foundation, at the end of 2020, it was launched the grant scheme for addressing mental health inequalities within diverse communities. And some of the key areas that we're really interested in funding were building capacity of grassroots organisations and to work in a psychologically informed way, increasing awareness of mental health services and supporting people to overcome barriers. And some of those things include reducing stigma and building trust, because they were the two fundamental things that we were continuously hearing about as being barriers to accessing services. The offer for a safe place for people to seek support for their mental health and not to feel like they are out of place or that they don't fit in, and using trusted relationships to help people to access mental health support for other services or any other professionals if required. And what's really great about the grants is that it also provides an opportunity to showcase some of the fantastic work that's taking place within Leeds, but doesn't always have the funding, the resources or the recognition for the work that they've been doing. The first round of grants was heavily oversubscribed, not really something that I was expecting. And that kind of indicates to us that there is a need for this type of funding, and the organisations that want to join forces to address it. There's numerous people in the community who are very keen to try and turn things around for people when it comes to their mental health and finding a safe place to talk about it, address it and treat it. And when our panellists met to deliberate about which organisations had the best programmes to address the mental health in Leeds, we wanted to consider all parts of Leeds, meaning that we were able to choose programmes that could help a sufficient number of beneficiaries, as well as including some of the top 10 most deprived areas within Leeds, some of those that have higher populations of ethnic minority communities, refugees, asylum seekers, and unfortunately some of those that really do feel forgotten about in parts of the city that are not necessarily considered to be highly populated with diverse communities. So we had numerous applications, and it was a really tough day, but it was very enjoyable as well, just to see how really committed people in this city are to try and create change. So I'll take you through some of our adult grant holders, and we were really pleased to select the following grant holders for the adult section, who we believe are offering a comprehensive, psychologically informed and integral way of working with our BME communities. And some of the names that you see there might you may already be aware of, as they are influential within the BME community, such as BHI, but some of them are fairly new grassroots organisations that have been serving our communities behind the scenes as volunteers in support groups, very small support groups, and also online services throughout the pandemic as well. So their roles really haven't stopped, and they've just had to try and learn to adapt. So all of these all of these grant holders are absolutely fantastic, and I'm really, really pleased that they were awarded the funding. Then we move on to the children and young people grant holders, and what's fantastic is that they had such amazing and creative ideas how to engage with our BME young people to address and normalise the conversation and action surrounding mental health. And what's really special about some of them is that they were so quick to be willing to partner up with other education providers and have direct access to some of the city's BME children who may have gone unnoticed or may not feel comfortable accessing some of the mental health services that are available through schools and other education providers as well. So these are absolutely fantastic. Just the way they touch on some of the social, emotional and mental health issues for our children and young people via various different ways of art, conversations and activities. So one thing that was really important for us is to be able to offer a continuous level of support for our grant holders, and not just kind of providing them with funding and then kind of leaving them alone and then bugging them further on down the line for data and analysis. We wanted them to feel like they were a part of a team, and that we're here for them, and that we really do want to see them be successful. And as a part of that, I started looking into how we could really offer genuine continuous support for these grant holders, and that kind of led me on to creating what I'd like to say is a bit of a forum between the grant holders, the adult ones, and then the children and young people, where they can turn to each other for any sorts of advice, they can signpost, but also they've developed a relationship with me where they can come to me and ask me anything if they need any help with anything. And I developed a resource pack for them so that they have lots of information to be able to give to their clients, and also to kind of top up for themselves, and saw some free mental health awareness training for a 2.5-hour extended version that kind of really looks at some of those things that maybe the hour session doesn't really touch on, like looking at how the connection between physical health and mental health. So it's been a real treat, and we're really proud of how far our grant holders have come so far. Some of them have just started, and some of them are due to start in September. So another thing that we wanted to kind of infuse within our grant holders is, the importance of tracking data and analysis throughout the programme. And I'm currently looking into it with LCF, Leeds Community Foundation, to plan a webinar for them to help grant holders that feel that they can benefit from the information of how to really do quality data and analysis, so that they can try and secure funding opportunities later on down the line. How do they look into try and secure something permanent for themselves, and also just so it's not overwhelming when it comes to the time where they do have to provide further information. And it doesn't stop there with the grants as well. Following the outcome of the grant scheme, LCF provided Shantona and BHI with further funding to be able to launch an unincorporated scheme, which helps unincorporated organisations to become funding ready and gain further knowledge and skills, so that they can, maybe have a shot at other grant opportunities that are coming up for them. If you'd like any further information about the programmes that the grant holders are providing, please contact me. I can send you some details about the programme towards the end of the presentation. So just wanted to kind of briefly touch on what my role is about, and I'll be looking at various streams of work to address mental health inequalities, and these are some of the priorities that I will be working on that I'm really passionate about. when these roles were created, it was taken into consideration that we should be looking at the lifespan of someone and their mental health across the years, and that means looking at childhood through to teenage years, young adulthood, and then into adulthood. And that leads on to the children and young persons role and how we work together within that role. And I'm just going to share a quote with you that the children and young people have, and it says, the key purpose of this work is to engage, support and energise system leaders and advocate for a different approach to address the increased risk of severe mental illness and poorer outcomes in minority ethnic populations, with a focus on children and young people's access to services, experiences and prevention. And a part of that role is also to look at some of the recommendations from the SEMH needs assessment and to look at how they can try and close the gap on that by working with some education providers and engaging with young people themselves to influence some sort of positive change. So lots to look forward to in regards to that. And then that kind of brings us back to our steering group. Sarah touched on it earlier, but just wanted to elaborate a little bit more about what our steering group is about. It is a strategic steering group, and it's been fantastic to have the people that we have in there, and it's an ever-growing steering group as well, with lots of people that are passionate about this particular agenda. And it allows us to be able to have that open dialogue, as Sarah said earlier, but also to kind of share best practice and to kind of look at things differently at times, to have some of your opinions challenged, and that's what it's really about. And to have representation from lots of different streams as well, whether it be psychology, psychiatry, public health, IAPT, third sector, adult social care, grant holders. Yeah, so that's something that we do on a bi-monthly basis, and we're enjoying how it's growing at the moment. And then that brings me on to the wider expert reference group, which will be a combination of service users and carers. And we want this to be people from the community with lived experience of mental health, whether it be severe mental health or a common mental health disorder. And we want to be able to work with people to co-design and co-collaborate on the shaping of things, because we can't create things for people with mental health without their engagement and their involvement. And it helps us to be able to understand the landscape of whether we're getting it right and whether we're shaping it correctly as well, and do we know what all the issues are. So one of the first activities that we have within our planning team for creative spaces is we do have some service users that are included in that planning team, and we're looking at how to shape and develop the next creative spaces event that's due for September. And we're really excited about it. So, you know, watch this space. So I think that this moves on to you, Sarah.
Yep, so I think we've covered most of this already. These are the things that are kind of on our work plan for the next kind of 6 months, I guess. And as we've sort of mentioned, the steering group's got a kind of delivery function and then a kind of energising and enabling function. So this is some of the stuff that we're hoping to deliver. Is there another slide?
Yeah. If you are interested in getting involved, or you would like any slides or any information, please follow us, reach out to us on Twitter, or you can contact me directly. It's probably better to contact me directly via email or on the phone. But we're very keen to have a better understanding of who wants to get involved and how they feel that they can get involved as well. So we'll move on to the Q&A. Are there any questions?
There is a question, Del, around where the events are advertised. I think Gurpreet's referring to the Creative Spaces events. So
yeah, the Creative Spaces events are usually circulated via email, but you can also sign up to them on on Eventbrite as well, and we also put something out on Twitter as well. So they're usually the platforms that we use to be able to publicise the event that's coming up.
So I don't know if anyone wants to ask a question in real life by turning their microphone.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, you can't see me because I've got camera trouble today, so I do apologise. It's Jazz from Engage Leeds.
Hi, Jazz.
And this is really more of a and I think probably everybody will know why I'm asking this question. How much is funding, or was funding, a barrier to achieving what we wanted to sign up to and wanted to be a part of in terms of Leeds as a city? For example, obviously I work for a service, and we deal with clients with mental health issues on a regular basis. And the waiting lists are nightmare, because we have such a lack of funding for the services that we have, and our clients unfortunately are unable to access mental health support when they need it. So conditions are left to deteriorate for a lot of people, and obviously we see a lot of barriers for our BAME communities within that context as well.
Yeah, so I think mental health services are woefully underfunded, aren't they, based on the need in the population. So the other part of my job has been in the past to look at what the need is in the population. I'm always surprised when I see the need in the population and then the numbers that we can actually support through these services. So I think there's a big programme of work underway at the moment called the NHS Community Mental Health Transformation Programme, which many of you will know about. This is around trying to provide better, holistic, more responsive services at a PCN level, so at the level of the kind of primary care, GPs, and then support services around that. And so yes, funding is always going to be an issue. And is it going to affect certain population? I think if certain population groups experience barriers to accessing services, and there are already barriers, then they're going to experience them to a greater extent. So yes, it is going to affect what we're doing. I guess what we didn't maybe say in the presentation that we gave is that Del and I are involved in lots of other bits of work where we're trying to influence, using the kind of journey and the language and the approach that we've just outlined, trying to influence things. So Del and I are both linked into the community mental health transformation work. We're linked into the new development of the crisis house and things like that. So what we're trying to do is, within a broad context of limited funding, make sure that the key priority groups are really up there in terms of people's consciousness when they're designing services. So yeah, I guess you're right, Jazz. It is an issue, but we'll keep going. We'll keep trying to make the case for particular population groups within that.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi, I would like to ask a couple of questions, please. Oh, I'm asking about the funding.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the funding pattern, I know it's all been cut and everything. They're cutting it everywhere. Well, I work for youth services, and I was wondering, where do I access to do funding? Because I've got a group of young people. Most of them are West African boys.
Yeah.
And I want to do a biking project with them.
Okay.
And I'm struggling to find funding, to get them on it.
Have you looked into to have a look on Leeds Community Foundation to see what grants that they're currently running, because they are constantly running some form of grant that people can apply for that's surrounding children, especially if it's a particular demographic or it's an activity?
Yeah, it's we see, because I work for Leeds City Council under youth services, and we're restricted on which we can apply for.
Yeah. I would say if you just email me with some further details, I can look into where we can into what's available currently.
Right, okay, I'll send you that now, because it's something I've been wanting to do, and
Yeah.
it's I've been finding it difficult to, for the funding for these young lads.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sure there'll be something. There's lots of different pots of money everywhere, but sometimes we can. Sometimes it's just not as publicised as we would like about where it is and who it's available to. So I understand that it's been difficult, but yeah, I'm happy to kind of support you, help look for that.
All right, thank you very much. I'll send you this email now while I'm on the case.
No problem. Thank you very much. Take care.
Del, do you want to talk through these final bits here?
Yeah. We want to thank you for joining us today to address this agenda. And if you have any questions that pop up into your head thereafter, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll be happy to answer any of those questions. If you'd like a copy of today's slides, you can email the email service just here. If you'd like any further information about public health training, you can also visit leeds.gov.uk/LPHT for any further resources and further information linked to today's topic. You can explore the Public Health Resource Centre as well, which is really effective. You can get lots of things there, books, leaflets, posters, lots of things. And to find out which information and resources Public Health Resource Centre holds on any COVID-19, you can watch a short film on that as well. And we just want to say thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.